Sometimes a single verse from the Bible can have massive life or death consequences for millions of people. Today, we're looking at one of those verses, a passage that puts ancient faith squarely up against modern medicine. We're going to break down exactly what it says and what it might actually mean. So yeah, this is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? How can a rule about ancient food customs be applied to a modern medical procedure that saves lives? To even begin to answer that, we've got to rewind and look at the original context. What did this command mean to the people who first heard it? So where does this whole debate come from anyway? Well, it all comes down to a specific doctrine held by Jehovah's Witnesses, which is based on their reading of the scriptures. And let's be clear, this isn't just some abstract theological argument. It's a belief that has a direct, profound impact on medical decisions, often in the most critical moments. The official stance, guided by the Watchtower organization, is pretty clear-cut. They see the biblical instruction to abstain from blood as an absolute divine command from God. And in their view, that doesn't just mean not eating blood. It extends to accepting a medical blood transfusion, even if it's needed to save a person's life. All right, to really get this, we've got to go right to the source. We're heading to a crucial meeting in the early Christian church, something recorded in the book of Acts, chapter 15. It's known as the Jerusalem Council. Let's look at the exact words that came out of that meeting. And here it is. This is the verse at the very heart of the entire debate. The apostles are telling non-Jewish believers, hey, stay away from a few specific things, and right there on the list is blood. On the surface, the word seems straightforward. But the real question is, what did abstain from blood actually mean to them back then? So, what was the whole point of this decree? Well, the analysis we're looking at argues it wasn't about laying down a new set of rules you had to follow to be saved. Not at all. It was more like a social compromise. The goal was to help Jewish Christians, who had really strict dietary laws, feel comfortable eating and worshiping alongside the Gentile Christians who didn't. It was all about keeping the peace and fostering unity. And that leads us right to what is maybe the most crucial part of any kind of biblical analysis: context. The source we're examining makes a powerful point. You can't understand what abstain from blood means unless you understand the world it was written in, a world that had absolutely no concept of modern medical transfusions. This chart just lays out the core argument perfectly. Back in the 1st century, abstaining from blood was all about food. It meant you shouldn't eat meat from an animal that was strangled because the blood would still be in the meat. That is a completely different universe from a modern blood transfusion, which isn't food at all. It's basically a liquid organ transplant, replacing a vital part of your body that you've lost. Okay, so with that context in mind, the source material we're looking at points out 4 major inconsistencies that pop up when you try to apply this ancient dietary rule to modern medicine. Let's walk through them one by one. Okay, first up, the analysis says to just look at the immediate context, the other things on that list right next to the word blood. Think about it. The phrase abstain from blood is sandwiched right between meats offered to idols and things strangled. Both of those are clearly about food and worship practices. According to this analysis, that strongly suggests the whole list, including the part about blood, was understood as a rule about what you eat, not about a medical procedure that nobody could have even imagined yet. All right, number 2. This one goes even deeper. It looks at a principle you can find all throughout the Bible: the absolute importance of human life. In Jewish tradition, there's a concept called pikuach nefesh. It's this idea that preserving a human life overrides almost any other ritual law. The source gives a couple of great examples. You've got Saul's starving soldiers who ate meat with blood in it out of sheer desperation, and they weren't punished for it. And then you have Jesus, who taught over and over again that saving a life was way more important than following the strict rules for the Sabbath. The argument is simple. Putting a ritual command ahead of a human life just seems to go against the whole spirit of the Bible. The third point gets a little philosophical. It asks why blood was considered so sacred in the first place, and it argues that this leads to a huge contradiction. It all goes back to this verse in the Old Testament. This is the foundation. The reason you weren't supposed to eat blood was because it was seen as representing the very life force of a creature, a life force that belongs to God alone. So, the key takeaway here is really important. Blood isn't just blood. In this context, it's being used as a symbol. It's a powerful, sacred metaphor for life itself. And that sets up this huge logical question. If blood is the symbol of life, does it really make sense to sacrifice the reality, the actual living person, just to preserve the symbol? The argument here is that doing so is a major theological mix-up, confusing the metaphor for the thing it represents. And that brings us to the fourth and final inconsistency. This one comes from looking at what happened to another item on that very same list from Acts 15, just a few years later. Think about this for a second. The decree said to abstain from meats offered to idols. But later, the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians and basically says, look, this isn't an absolute moral law. It's a matter of conscience. So the source argues, if one part of the list is flexible and depends on the situation, doesn't that suggest the whole list was meant to be a guideline for that specific time and place, not a set of timeless, unbreakable laws? So what does this all add up to? Well, the analysis we're examining suggests that all four of these inconsistencies point in the same direction, that we should be focusing on the underlying principle behind the text, not just the literal prescriptive words on the page. So the big takeaway from this whole analysis is this. The decree in Acts 15 was a practical, temporary fix for a social problem in the early church. It was about building bridges between cultures. The argument is that it was never, ever intended to be a universal, timeless command that would govern a life-saving medical procedure thousands of years in the future. The author of this analysis, Happy Akande, wraps it all up with this really strong call to action. It's basically a plea for personal responsibility, urging people to dig into the scriptures for themselves with an open and objective mind, instead of just accepting a ruling from an organization. And that leaves us with this final, really important question. This whole issue with blood transfusions points to a much bigger challenge for people of faith today. When our ancient texts seem to clash with modern science, how do we figure out the original intent? How do we know the difference between